Hi, so I'm Kate Brindley. I'm Project Director, Arts, Culture and Heritage at South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, which is the combined authority of Rotherham, Doncaster, Sheffield and Barnsley. It's a relatively new regional organisation, so I'm not sure how much people will really understand of its remit, but it was formed as an economic development vehicle predominantly, but it's really moving into a very different era now and has a new mayor, Oliver Coppard, who some of you will have come across. I've been at SYMCA for 2 years. I'm a freelancer. I work 3 days a week for them, and I was brought in to really start the development on arts, culture and heritage. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, because before James.
Thanks, Kate. So I'm James Locke. I work for an organisation called Opus. We're a social enterprise based in Sheffield, and I'm one of the co-founders and directors. And we've been working in arts and culture for about 15 years now. We co-founded something called Now and Then magazine in 2008, which was a arts and culture magazine. Ran a lot of spoken word and music events, and just broadly been really interested in how arts and culture create space for new ways of acting, reacting, resisting, response making, and ultimately I'm really pleased to be part of the team that delivered this report on arts and culture engagement, which I'll speak to in a little bit.
Thank you, James. Thank you. But James, you've got some slides that you want to share. I mean, whether you want to.
I have, yeah. Kate, did you want to go into a bit about how the work came about?
Yeah, just a few minutes of a bit of background. So as I just mentioned, 2 years ago, I was brought in by the previous mayor, Dan Jarvis, previous mayor of South Yorkshire, Dan Jarvis, really on the back of the combined authority doing an initial piece of research by, I guess they're economists, I would say, called Chamberlain Walker. And that was a sort of state of the region report on arts, culture and heritage. So it sort of attempted to map arts, culture and heritage across the region. It's a good report and it's on our website. And that was in 2020. In fact, they wrote it just before we all went into lockdown. So it was sort of came out during that period. And of course, the world's changed a bit since then. But what it did do was galvanise the combined authority to actually start to say, we need to do some further work into arts, culture and heritage and its importance to our region. And so their first action after this report was to bring in capacity, which was in the shape of me. I've worked in the creative and cultural sector for 30 years, mainly in museums and galleries and cultural services. I've been a CEO of a charity amongst and many cultural organisations, mainly always in the public sector. I was brought in really because I am from a practitioner point of view, as opposed to more of a research and economist point of view. So I was coming in to do the next leg of what needed to happen to turn this research report into a set of actions. So my area of work has been around further research and development, engagement, pilot projects, including we put £1 million into the sector in 2021, really around COVID recovery, but that's given us lots of good evidence for how people use that money and what was needed. Some of my work's been about integration within the combined authority, and that's an easy thing to say and not an easy thing to deliver, I can tell you. And then looking at where there are funding opportunities and alignment with other agendas. The combined authority got its devolution deal from government only about a year before I arrived, so we're still relatively new in what we're doing. So there is a real opportunity for arts and culture as we move forward as South Yorkshire, and the combined authority is here to stay. It can't just be got rid of by whoever the next government is. It will be here to stay, and we have a devolution deal for 30 years. So I was given a budget when I arrived by Dan Jarvis, and one thing I said was I want to do further research because it's really important. We've got that great report as a starter, but we need more. And the areas that I identified were twofold, really. One was around creative industries, which we hadn't got a lot of research in. So I commissioned a piece of research on that, which worked across the region and was quite data-driven, but not purely data-driven. And then the second piece of work, which we're going to talk about today, is a much more detailed engagement piece, because the first report was an overview. What it didn't do was talk in depth to practitioners on the ground. And that's what I said had to happen, because data's great and really important. Engagement equally is important. And it was really important those two things came together. So now we've got a really great suite of research and data and evidence, which is what I needed. Culture always has to have double the evidence, I find, to make any case. And it's there in spades now. What was also really important was that SYMCA did deep and meaningful engagement in order that it started to have some credibility in this space. I was really keen that the engagement consultants and the data creative industries consultants work together. So that's what I did as well. I put James together with Ian Bennett, who was the other consultant, and so that they could also really get the most out of these pieces of work. And I was absolutely delighted that Opus came forward for this commission and were standout in their submission. And what was important to me was that they were based in the region, because that also added to the credibility. So that sets the scene, and I'm sure there'll be many questions at the end of the, as we go through this, and about the what next and all the rest of it, of which we can talk through. Just to say, James, you probably haven't noticed this, but it'll be news to you, is that the full report is now on our website.
Oh, really? Oh, lovely.
Yes. Now it's slightly hidden because nobody actually told me they'd uploaded it. I found it. So it is under our research heading, which you can find through our arts and culture pages. So you can look at the whole of James's report and the whole of Ian Bennett's report, and also the Chamberlain Walker report. And those three reports work in concert, along with another report that's on there by the university about the really deep effects of COVID on our regional cultural sector. So I'm going to bow out there and let James tell you more about the process and what we discovered.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Kate. Shall I just go for it, Vicky? Is that...
Yes, please, James.
Yeah. Okay.
Over to you.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, I'll share screen. So I guess a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is probably stuff that, just from working in the sector, you'll kind of recognise. And I'm going to try and offer like a brief summary on what is 100 pages of report. So you'll find some gaps, I'm sure, and please do try and pull me out on those, and really looking forward to discussing in more depth, I guess, the implications of some of this work. Can you all see that screen okay? Is that not much? Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process we went through, how we formed that, a little bit about what we found, some data that relates to Rotherham specifically, and then I'm going to talk in a sweeping way, I suppose, about some of the conclusions and the recommendations that came out of that. You'll recognise Vicky's face there on the pictures on the right, and Vicky was one of the area representatives who we worked with to really engage in local authority areas that we weren't as well engaged in as a Sheffield-based organisation. But before we did that, we appointed a steering group, and you can see all their names in the purple box on the bottom left to give you a sense of that. And the purpose of that really was to hold the work to account somewhere, and we wanted a mix of kind of institutional voices as well as freelancers, and we met with them every quarter or so during the 4 or 5 months of this work. We commissioned the area representatives, as I've said. We then went into a round of exploration chats, which were fairly open form, but looking at funders, talking to elected members, talking to institutional heads, and really just trying to get a flavour for the landscape of really how is arts and culture in the middle of COVID at this point as well. So sort of early 2022 sort of period of time. We took that data from those exploration chats and we arranged with some guidance from the steering group, some roundtables, sorry. So we did a roundtable in every local authority. We brought people together to talk about essentially what was working, what was not working, and we looked for some patterns across those 4 events. We then took that data and then created a public survey. We went out with that, and then we went through the public survey and then identified people that we thought, oh, that's really interesting what you've kind of said there, or what came out of the round table. Can we do something more in depth with you, and did some one-on-one interviews. And then we did a respondent feedback session. So anyone that had been engaged through the whole process, we brought everyone back together and we said, this is what we found from the data, which felt like good practice to kind of offer something to people who had donated their time to take part in the engagement work. So that gives you a sense of kind of what we did. What came out of that really early on was these like 3 value frames, which I just want to reference because I think, again, they're kind of obvious to people that work in the sector, but we tried to hang really the contribution that the sector was making on these 3 value frames. So the first one is just the inherent value of doing creative practice, art for art's sake, you could call it. The second one is arts and culture and heritage for public good, so how arts and culture contributes to issues of collective concern. And then the third was arts and culture for economic growth. And you'll see much more of that last value frame in the work that Ian Bennett has done, which Kate referenced earlier, but the multiplier effect is really interesting. So arts and culture contribute over double what they cost effectively. So we really are a sector that has economic power and influence, as well as a sector that has that makes really sincere and important contributions to the social fabric, as well as a sector that creates absolutely new and wonderful things that have their own inherent value. This is a data summary from really the survey. So we spoke to just under 400 people and organisations in this work. The majority of those people had turnovers of less than 50k, and one of our aspirations in this work was to really speak to people and organisations that don't often get heard in this kind of process, and turnover, I guess, is kind of one way of recognising that. Interestingly, 15.5% of those people started work during the pandemic, which kind of spoke to this idea of people really reframing and reorientating their lives and what was important. And so many people I know personally have reframed and reorientated their life to speak to arts and culture and recognise the value that comes with that. You'll see on this map here that the light green, those are areas that we didn't get any respondents from. So by no means are we claiming that this engagement process touched every single soul in South Yorkshire working in the creative sector, but we did get coverage across quite a lot of it. And you saw about 18.2% there from respondents were from Rotherham. Just drawing out another couple of things I think are interesting in this slide. 68.6% of respondents said they work in culture, arts and heritage to strengthen community participation. And I think that value is just absolutely critical to the work that this whole sector does, that it's often really unrecognised for. And then finally, and this was a theme that ran through every piece of engagement we did, respondents identified a lack of funding and support to access funding as critical to the success of the sector. Another thing that really came out in our work was a sense of real underrepresentation in the sector, particularly around decision making from those who have marginalised lived experiences. We asked people in the survey to just help us create a word cloud for how the sector felt at the moment. And I think you can see there, it's quite compelling what people were saying. Underfunded, undervalued, fragmented, unrepresentative, precarious, but also some positive stuff in there as well, inspiring, passionate, dynamic. But I think overall, really not the picture of the sector that we want to see in the region. We then asked a more future-orientated question: what should it feel like? And we saw connected, collaborative, inclusive, vibrant, a strong collective, grassroots, progressive, ambitious, transparent, respectful, unified, drawing out a few of those words there. And I think this sort of word cloud is really helpful because it tells us really what success should look and feel like. And a friend of mine who I work with in neighbourhood democracy movements at the moment said that her aspiration was for indicators to be felt, not counted. And so I guess this is really what that might feel like if we're doing a good job in the sector. Drawing out some data from the Rotherham Roundtable, these are the things that kind of came out as what's strong. By no means exhaustive. This is not everything that's strong in Rotherham, of course, but these were some of the things that we highlighted. Spoken word and poetry, tourist attractions, international acts, the people from Rotherham, and within that, the phrase quietly brilliant and aching with potential, we just absolutely loved. So that's kept its place in the report throughout. The two national portfolio organisations in Rotherham, a sense they were good places to meet, females leading, Festival of Women, communication between users and those heading projects, that sense of real engagement with participants, which is often lacking in work in this sector. Improved advocacy in heritage and culture, the university and the two colleges. What's not working, what came out for us anyway in our roundtables, a sense of, while there might be meeting space, it's unaffordable, or it's high cost, or it's unavailable. A sense of council dominance in the arts, not creating space for the grassroots, and within that, a sense of bureaucracy that prevents work taking place at the speed in which it needs to. A project by project basis that creates a kind of precarity, and I think this is felt across the entire sector, by the way, that funding is driven by project rather than by the core value of the team of the people doing the work. Access to information about what was taking place in Rotherham, and with the failure of like Visit Sheffield a few years ago, Visit South Yorkshire, we see this kind of gap in how we're doing marketing as a region. I think that's true, particularly here. And then finally, bringing it out, people from marginalised backgrounds asked to do things for free, a lack of representation in decision making. And while this is true in almost every aspect of life, it came out particularly clearly in this engagement work across Sheffield, across Doncaster, across Rotherham, across Barnsley. This is a pervasive problem that we need to address. So we brought all this data together and we passed some analysis over the top of it. And we broke that analysis down into these themes here. So this lack of funding and investment into the sector, a sense of a real failure of cultural leadership in the sector. And what we meant by that really was a failure to hold all those three value frames that I mentioned at the beginning, because valuing just one of those doesn't really do the job of recognizing what the whole contribution or the sum of the contribution of the sector is. And that's deeply problematic. And so what we need is cultural leadership that does that, but also cultural leadership that is diverse and inclusive. There was a lack of confusion and knowledge about SYMCA, and as Kate said, the relatively new organisation with a relatively new remit, and devolution itself is in growing pains as we still speak. The CA here, stands for Culture, Arts and Heritage. Apologies, I should have named the acronym there. That it offers a plurality of these social and economic innovations, and really trying to bring that out as core to this work. It's not just about money, it's not just about economics, it's also about a contribution to the social fabric, contributions to issues of collective concern. And arts and culture really uniquely does this. Tied to that, the culture serves place and community really clearly. And again, that comes out as an important thing for both government in levelling up and also in terms of Arts Council funding priorities, for example. And then a real need for this authentic collaboration and a bold set of narratives for the region. So a shared story that recognises the plurality of the different people and organisations working in the space, but one that we can all get behind, that says this is why arts and culture is important, and this is what it means to do arts and culture in the region. Just going into a bit more detail on that analysis. This top line here, I think, is really at the core of what we found. And so I just read it verbatim. Symptomatic of the region's failure to value culture, arts and heritage holistically are the problems of equity, access to funding, visibility and inclusion within the sector that have been identified by the respondents. And I think that's something that's really quite important to hold and react to. We shouldn't be trying to solve the problem. We should be trying to solve the problem upstream rather than just the symptoms of that problem as they express themselves in terms of equity or in terms of access to funding or in terms of inclusion. So within that, then looking at how we have access to decision makers as a sector, how that access lends itself to more funding. A sense that we really don't recognise how cross-sector and porous the culture, arts and heritage sector is. And really that's its contribution, is that it makes contributions to other sectors' health and viability. And that's something we don't recognise very well. And within that then, thinking about how do we invest into the glue or the conditions of that porous and pervasive behaviour of the sector, rather than drawing out, or as well as rather drawing out large-scale infrastructure projects or kind of snazzy arts and culture programmes, I suppose. A sense that we'd all really benefit from more regional interventions which join up our infrastructure, our capital assets, our people and our programmes. That would be very helpful. The joined up narrative, the role of SYMCA really as a broker and convener for the region, in the sense that it really is the only local authority or public body that has that remit for the whole region. And so there's real value in there in terms of its brokering and convening. I think there's a real issue around the capacity and bandwidth that local authorities have to strategically invest in culture, arts and heritage in their individual areas. I don't think it's a lack of desire to do so. I think it's a lack of bandwidth and a lack of capacity. But unfortunately, the knock-on effect of that is that funders, public funders, tend not to invest as much. And what they're really looking for is that kind of match funding and that match contribution from local authorities. Now, this is the nature of philanthropic funding. It's deeply problematic. So this is nobody's fault. It's just the nature of where we are as it stands. And then finally, a real sense that there were no local authorities or funders effectively engaging with grassroots culture, arts and heritage organisations across their local authority. So a real sense of a kind of air gap between organisations and institutions of a certain size and the grassroots, creative freelancers, etc. Following these conclusions, we made 40 recommendations. In for a penny, in for a pound, we thought. And those recommendations were split over these categories. So how do we, recommendations associated with how we invest in the conditions for a thriving culture, arts and heritage sector, recommendations about what a financial intervention might look like in that space, recommendations around how cultural leadership could change to address some of this, recommendations around a new investment vehicle that had equity and participation baked into it, recommendations around different areas of collective concern, like public transport, environment and ecological collapse, education and skills, and a recommendation around the importance of a public engagement exercise and regional framework that holds some of these new functions. And then finally, the importance of recommendations around narrative and narrative coherence as we talk about arts and culture in the region. I'm coming to the end, so please do bear with me. We, in the back of our report, we were conscious that 40 recommendations might get a touch lost. So we offered 5 things that SYMCA could start tomorrow, should it so wish. And I'll just run through those really quickly. So make a bold and clear statement about the value of all arts and culture in the region and the value that SYMCA itself saw of that contribution. And included within that, we recommended naming an amount of investment. And we also recommended naming where culture, arts and heritage sits within the MCA framework, or the Combined Authority framework, and the LEP. We recommended that SYMCA could act as a broker and convener to bring local authorities and funders together to have some warts and all honest conversations about the state of the sector and how we can share problems and share response making. We recommended a large scale public engagement exercise to really kind of draw into that narrative piece. So speaking to members of the public about what arts and culture means to them to really get a sense of flavour for that. We also recommended co-designing a cultural framework for the region that included the regional promotion strategy, that included the investment vehicle, and that included digital democracy tools to ensure that participation could be done all year round. And then finally, we recommended that there should be an investment into peer-to-peer training within the sector. Some of the respondents that we spoke to had talked about knowledge being lost. So when people were retiring or exiting the sector, they felt like their knowledge was lost. They didn't have anywhere to pass it on to. And this rang alarm bells for us. And so we thought a double investment into peer-to-peer support could be helpful. Finally, sorry, a bit of a road. We offered a lens for success. So how do we know if we're doing good work? Are we centering underserved people? Has the investment created the conditions where the plurality of our value contributions to the sector are recognised? Has SYMCA invested in its own voice and reputation as a thought leader in the space? Has SYMCA, in doing so, positioned itself to draw in additional resource? Have interventions been regional, capitalising on that unique position that SYMCA hold? And bear in mind, this is a report very much for how SYMCA can do stuff as opposed to local authorities in their own right, although I would argue there's a lot of crossover. Has SYMCA become authentically inclusive and an equitable broker and convener for the sector across the region? There's a lot in all of that, and I've whizzed through it really quickly. That's my last slide. I'll stop sharing screen now. I hope that was of interest and that some of it was recognisable. I just really welcome any thoughts or contributions. Thanks.
Thank you, James. That's brilliant. Thank you. If anybody does want to ask any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself, put your hand up, or put something in the chat. I'd be interested to know if anybody did know about this report. Did anybody in the meeting, have you come across the report before, or the work of Opus and SYMCA? Do feel free to unmute or put something in the chat.
Is it possible for people to unmute, or do we have to do that? I don't know how that works, Vicky.
Yeah, I think people can unmute. Yeah.
All right, okay. Well, I have to say I didn't know about the report until you told me, Vicky. So
it was a real privilege for us to be involved, just in terms of advocating for those voices that don't often get heard, and for, you know, we're often seen as Sheffield's kind of poor relation next door, and there's so much good work going on in Rotherham that doesn't get recognised. So it was really great that we could bring Rotherham to the table, and actually we probably could have, it could have been a 5-year-long project, because we didn't get to speak to absolutely everybody we wanted to. And, you know, I'm not sure if there's actually anybody in the room who did contribute to those events, actually, which I thought those people might come along. I've just seen somebody with their hand up. Jordan, can you unmute?
Hi, yes. Is that all right? Can you hear me?
Hi, Jodie, thanks for coming.
I'm not putting my camera on because I'm full of COVID. So I'm like, yeah, and yeah, tired mother full of COVID. So it's not happening, I'm afraid. Yeah, so I guess my question is probably more for Kate. I guess now I'm wondering, like, what are the next steps now? So what are the next short to medium term steps? Because obviously the report is thinking a bit longer term, but I'd be interested to know what that more immediate response is.
Yeah, so I have to always remind myself that when I started 2 years ago, people just thought, I think people in SYMCA just thought I was some sort of strange oddity. They probably still do. But anyway, in that, what has culture got to do with what their remit was, if you see what I mean? I was like this strange being that kept sort of going, hiya, culture's really important. Can I help? You know, can we talk about it? So for me, the fact that SYMCA has put some money into research, has put some money into a practitioner being embedded in them for 2 years, that has started to talk about this in meetings, which I never thought it would be talked about, that it's started to be something that is seen as actually, I want it to be more central, I want it to be more acted upon, but I have to be mindful and patient about the amount of pressing need that South Yorkshire Combined Authority is trying to deal with all at the same time. We run the whole of the transport network, which you can imagine is the biggest headache ever, through to huge government funding that is put on the Combined Authority with you know, a need to get that out the door, to adult education, health initiatives, training and business. You know, it's unbelievably mind-blowing the amount of things that the Combined Authority has to do in very quick order, and with actually not the most developed staff team either. So we're still quite a forming organisation. We got a new mayor in last year, and he's new to politics and new to this whole huge system that he's come to try and navigate his way in. And the great thing about our new mayor is he is a cultural advocate. So alongside the work I've been doing, which I describe to my colleagues at SYMCA as I do missionary work, I occasionally say to them, because it feels like that. I'm like the missionary of culture. Oliver, who the mayor now, you know, he is a great advocate for culture. So the things that we have been doing are seeding, for me, the next step in the journey. One thing I managed to do was to get £1 million from one fund and vie it into culture. And that was me trying to hustle that and make enough of a case to do that. And when I see an opportunity, because I'm there embedded in the organisation and I have this, you know, set of developed relationships and evidence base, I'm able to look at how I influence some of this funding coming through. So for instance, we had something called shared prosperity funds, which is supposed to be the government's answer to European funding. Well, that's come through us, as a lot of money is doing. And I managed with colleagues across the region to get culture as one of the 10 priorities in that. So it's just all those little wins over time. The next stage is to really, when the mayor can focus and when our executive can focus, to land the next stage of funding for culture. And there's several things for me which are markers of success, and that is that they will have someone like me embedded in SYMCA, because I'm a freelancer on my contract gets renewed every 6 months. So what a success for me is that it's actually embedded in the team and becomes part of their remit, just like business development does. And so having an actual team that's working across South Yorkshire to deal with a lot of these issues and to enable this is one of my markers of success. Another one is having a dedicated culture fund. Now, I think we're edging closer to that, and I'm confident it will happen. I can't tell you now how much it will be and what it looks like, but I'm confident it will happen in some way. Another one is to have a forum, as James said, which enables the broadest possible set of voices from across the cultural sector to have an engagement in the cultural priorities for the region moving forward. And for us to have a forum with other funders as well, because that's one of the things that's really important, is that we get together with the sector and with funders to make decisions, because too often decisions are made in isolation and in a rivalrous and competitive way, which is not helpful to anyone in South Yorkshire. And if we can break that culture and start to work more together for the collective good of our sector, that will be another measure of success for me. In terms of where I might be on that trajectory, some days I think I'm getting really far, and other days I say, oh my God, it's harder than I thought. So sorry, that's probably not what you want to hear, Jodie, but I am confident we're making progress, and the engagement of the sector is so critical in that. So I always say to people, the Combined Authority is your 4 local authorities, and advocating to those people in your 4 local authorities to ensure culture is higher up on everyone's agenda is something we can all do, because that's the voice that needs to be heard. Too often it isn't.
Yes, we've got a question from Jen in the chat. Do you want to read it out, Vicky, or Jen, do you want to unmute and speak?
I can unmute. In some ways, I don't know if it's something that can be gone into here. It was, whilst Kate was speaking, I was just thinking, this still seems very much like an add-on rather than a thread that is running through, given the report that we have just had explained to us, and the things that we know, those of us who work on the ground, that this is such an important field in so many ways, not just economically, but psychologically, emotionally, for community building, for the good of our region. It sounds as though it should be a thread. Nobody should be arguing about this. It clearly should be a thread. And it should be a thread for SYMCA. But it sounded very much like, I'm sorry, Kate, in your response, that it is very much an add-on. Yeah, you've kind of answered it in your response without realizing. Also, you said something about collaboration, and I feel, from my limited knowledge, that is happening in a way that it hasn't happened in the past in South Yorkshire. That is already well underway. Other people who know more about the field would be able to confirm that if I'm wrong, but just the little that I know, I feel that part of the puzzle is already well underway, and it is for the authorities in all their forms to take that seriously, to take culture seriously. I won't say anything more.
Thank you, Jen.
Well, here.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear that you think collaboration is happening across the region more and more. And that's really very encouraging. And that's one of the ways this agenda will move, in my opinion.
May I unmute and say something? I think it'd just be so important that we share projects. I'll just really quickly share an example of what I think would work. So we were really lucky to gain one of the commissions for the COVID-19 pandemic workshops. It was so valuable. The feedback's been fantastic. We spent hours on it. We featured in the Millennium Galleries. It was absolutely amazing. It's going to be in the archives. But yet then that was only for Sheffield. So I've got all of these amazing resources that have been written with young people, but can't be used anywhere else. And I find that really quite odd, to be honest. We couldn't use it in Rotherham schools, we couldn't use it in Barnsley schools, but yet the need was there. So I've now got all these resources with a project coming to the end on the 30th of April, but it was funding via Sheffield City Council. And I just think there's got to be a better way that we can do that and share all this amazing work that everybody's doing. It's not just pigeonhole. When it's so beneficial to young people, it's written with young people and with young people in mind. I just find that quite sad. So that's what I'm on a bit of a mission about, to be honest, that to have that collaboration and to share more resources. Because obviously it won't just be me, everybody will have these absolutely amazing resources that they've written, but then it's like they get shelved and then we move on to the next one and then we move on to the next one. And I just think that's such a shame. So I just wanted to share that, to try and get that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonie. I wonder, Kate, I was wondering with what Leonie was saying there and what Jen had said, that I heard recently from Rebecca Maddox at Sheffield that actually the councils and people with the culture and arts of remit do meet quite frequently. Is it monthly or quarterly that you meet? Yeah,
we meet every other month. I mean, when I started, I made them all meet monthly.
Yeah.
Like it or not.
Yeah.
And because I called the meeting, I agended it, I did it, So sometimes it takes that kind of somebody to start bringing people together and, bringing opportunities together and challenging them and saying, why can't we, shall we? And I've actually seen quite a development in that bunch of people over that time, because now they're driving the agenda with me as opposed to me driving the agenda with them. So, it feels like we're on that journey and it's a positive one. And I also feel that they're speaking regionally much more and understanding and thinking more like, Leonie's point about how do we ensure that there's value across the region. I think sometimes they are these bizarre barriers that people put up for whatever reason, which I challenge so regularly about why are you saying that? Why, who says that it can't be shared? Who says? Why not? Have you tried that?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. I did ask, because we've been approached by so many schools in different regions. I did ask, and they were like, "Oh no, really sorry." It's been such an amazing project. So that's just one example. But it's just so much time and effort.
I know. And so often I will, and this sounds really dull, but it's some of these things that really matter. Things like data sharing. I couldn't believe some of the data sharing issues I had in SYMCA, that they couldn't share things across the 4 authorities. I was like, are you kidding me? Isn't that one of the most fundamental things? Yeah. And so actually challenging the contracts team and the legal team and the data team and saying, that's not acceptable. And actually making progress in that, that's a little win, but actually with quite a big consequence, because people can share data on various things now. But, sometimes we have to challenge why that, there's no reason why some of these things can't be shared. And, you know, I constantly come across projects where I think I really want, you know, that should be, you know, should be out there. I mean, I'm glad to see Claire Thornley's on this call. And that's, you know, Claire and I are working on exactly one of these such projects, which is taking all the amazing work about our favourite places in Sheffield and looking at how we do that across, you know, how does Claire work with and enable and help to work across the region? And so, you know, I've been able to fund some piloting work on that, and there are other examples of some of the work across the region that we're doing. So there are some wins, and I think I can see some positive effects.
I think with places like Rotherham, you know, what we came to understand is we didn't have an arts remit for 5 years. We didn't have a arts and culture and heritage officer. We then were run by central government and had commissioners. So we were constantly just shouting into a big black hole where nobody understood the value of our work. Nobody even cared or didn't have the time if they did. So now that we have got people like Leanne and Polly on board, things have started to improve and get better, and you know, there's more opportunities and we're working together. And one thing that we did do, because we were fed up of kind of being ignored, was created Rotherham Creative Network. I was going to lots of meetings where they were saying there's not many creatives here in Rotherham, we need to commission this work out. And it was through anger that I went home and set up this network to just make sure that people could share what they were up to, because it wasn't the sector that I knew. I knew that people were working tirelessly to do what they wanted to, you know, to achieve things. There's people on this call that I can see today have worked so hard and given everything they've got to a cause, and they weren't getting recognised. So I think that maybe, Leonie, a bit of a grassroots approach to this across South Yorkshire as well might be useful. You know, if a few people on the call did want to get their heads together and think about this South Yorkshire network from the bottom up way. To what we found with the network is, once we started to become established and have a shared voice, you couldn't ignore us anymore, to the point where actually, oh gosh, there's 900 people there who all got creativity in some way, shape or form, and which means there's a voice, and it wasn't just me shouting it like a crazy, oh, there's that crazy art woman again. And I could say, here's an army of people like me, listen to us, kind of thing, and it created a bit of a case. So maybe we should start meeting up as South Yorkshire network between ourselves quarterly throughout the year. I do think there is the creative industries thing, isn't there, Kate? But
yeah, I put some money into just starting some meetings, and we've got a mailing list about 170, 180 people that have attended things. There is no reason why that list can't join up with everyone else. The whole point in that was, it was about starting the dialogue. It's not about an ownership issue for me. It's about people starting a dialogue and a movement, because you're absolutely right. If the grassroots are, you know, you can't ignore them, and you're so visible, then, you know, bring it on, really. I mean, I used to work in Bristol, and Bristol was almost creative despite all the council and everything, because it was the grassroots that were the voice and that forced the change. And you know, that was so gratifying to see. Ultimately, they had to listen.
yeah.
And that, you know, sometimes it takes that.
Definitely. We certainly found it worked with what we did, and all we did was set up a Facebook forum, invite people, and then start having bits of meetings and gatherings, and it slowly and surely built from that as to where now Flux are funding us, and we can do more events and more things. So there's so much power. It's been hard, you know. Mark and myself have volunteered all the way through it for the past 3 years, but it's been mainly ran by its members and people sharing knowledge and coming together. And so maybe that's something to think about us doing across South Yorkshire as well. And do get in touch. I'll put my email in the chat, and if anyone wants to talk about it, I'm quite happy to talk.
You don't need permission, you just do it.
And that's what's quite great about it, because we are creatives, we're disruptors, we do kind of rock the boat, and it kind of makes. I could remember when people in Rotherham were quite nervous about what we were doing. Like, I was kind of like a vigilante artist, and they were like, oh, what's she up to, what's she doing, what's it? And this kind of power was building in communities, in people. There were women's sewing groups where their creativity wasn't being valued, but they were dressmakers, they were so to getting people like that out and to have a bit of a voice, it was very, very powerful and quite scary for some people, I think. But yeah, do get in touch. I will put my email in there, and if anyone does want to have a chat, then do get in touch. And I think for us in Rotherham and for the wider South Yorkshire, we've got lots of these kind of events coming up. We've got a monthly social happening on the 30th of April at the Bridge Inn, with some guest speakers and musicians and things like that. And then every month now for the next 12 months, we'll be having meetings either online or in person. We're also going to be having panel meetings that are quarterly throughout the year. So our first panel meeting is in April at Clifton Park Museum, and we're trying to bring people from South Yorkshire together, so across the region. So we've got John Finch, who heads up the culture in and culture and arts remit in Barnsley Council. Then we've got Doncaster Creative Network, Natasha, ourselves, Rotherham Creative Network, and Olivia from Sadaka in Sheffield. So we're trying to bring those South Yorkshire folk together to talk and to listen to each other, and for others to listen to them, to just start building a bit of momentum. So maybe that's where it does start. And I think we've kind of picked those speakers to represent a real grassroots thing like Doncaster Creative Network and ourselves and Sadaka. And then you've got John and Clifton Park Museum, are a little bit more strategic and statutory services in that way. So we do keep an eye on our socials, and you're more than welcome to come along to those events and get involved and put your ideas forward and things that you think we should work on as a group and a collective.
Can I just check something? You said that the Bridge Inn was in April, but I think it's March, isn't it? It's the end of this month.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, this one is rearranged. I'm just going to put it in the chat now. It's the 30th of March. You're right.
That's it. Yeah.
The panel meeting in April.
What time? 5:30, is it?
5:30 till 7:30.
With the option of staying longer.
Yeah, there is an open mic night after that, and we've got some Delta Blues musicians playing. Just a chance to come together. We've got, instead of having meetings this month, I'm saying just come to the network. You have to speak to me there. So hopefully lots of ideas bouncing off each other, and ways to work together. And I've just realised it's 1 minute to 8, so we have run out of time, but some great conversations. And if there is anyone that's not been able to ask a question that wants to, please do email us and get in touch, or send us a direct message on social media.
You're also welcome to put any questions in the Rotherham Creative Network Facebook group as well, because I think I've just checked, there's 974 people in there now. So if you ask a question there, you're very likely to get an answer.
Definitely. I think that's been a power of the network as well, because we don't have to answer it. There's so much skill and expertise and knowledge between those people that if someone does ask a question, those experts do stand up and are able to answer it. But I have put my email in the chat there. So I suppose it's just time to say thank you to Kate and James for speaking and sharing that amazing work. And I'm really proud to have played a tiny little part in that. So thank you. And thank you all for coming, and hopefully we'll see you at our event on the 30th of March, or some of the panel events. And if anyone's interested in speaking or getting involved at these events, or you've got a hot burning topic that you'd really like to share and discuss, please do get in touch, because we've left quite a lot of room for us to try and just respond as and when we can. So do get in touch. And if you don't mind, we have got your email addresses from your registering, so we'll stay in touch with you. You do have the option to opt out of that if you don't want to get an email from us. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody. And thanks for coming.
Thanks, Vicky.
Thanks for asking us. Good to see you all.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, James. Thank you.